Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War news update for the 4th of July 2024. 4th of July, Independence Day for some, voting day for others. It's a beautiful day out there. If you're British, get out there and exercise your democratic responsibility and vote. Yeah, that's about that. Make sure you do that. I'll be doing that a little bit later. In the meantime, let's go straight to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. Of course, you can find them in the description to the video. And we have a day of big losses in a few of these categories yet. Again, 1,200 personnel is pretty high. 9 tanks are about average. 17 APVs, armored personnel vehicles, about average. 65 artillery systems, over 3 times the average. And my goodness, the figures for artillery systems getting taken out on a daily basis are huge. And it does leave you wondering if these are accurate. And if they are accurate, are they having an effect on the Russian ability to hammer the Ukrainians? Has there been? I would love to get some opinion, or better still, data, to work out whether the Russian, we hear that they were firing sort of 10,000 rounds a day. Earlier on in all, that's 40,000. So there is already a big difference. Is that due to a lack of shells, or is that also due to a lack of barrels and a lack of artillery systems to be able to fire that ordnance? I would love to know if there has been an effect of the last month or 2 or 3 or more in terms of hammering the Russian artillery so consistently. Now, they do have a lot of stockpiles, so people say, how can they lose this amount? It's crazy, therefore it can't be true. But we know from satellite imagery that they just have thousands upon thousands of pieces of artillery, and that's self-propelled guns, although I think they've probably cycled through a large number of those, which is why we're seeing towed guns now much more frequently. So D20s, D10s, D20s, D30s, really old bits of kit. So that tells you something, and then what's left of those will be of lower quality. So they will, yes, they have huge, or have had huge stockpiles of these pieces of equipment, but the quality that they'll be getting of these to the front line will be challenging for the Russians for sure. Anyway, 2 anti-aircraft warfare systems to attack, 73 vehicles and fuel tanks, and I think that's going to be largely underwritten by motorbikes and golf buggies and quads. So that is there's a wide remit for that category, and 4 pieces of special equipment. So we go to Andrew Perpetual's loss list and see what he has for today, and he usefully gives us a synopsis to the side. As you can see straight away, the ratio is very much back in favour of being pro-Ukrainian there. 65 Russian losses in total, 23 Ukrainian losses. That's about a 3-to-1. But when we look at the combat assets, Andrew has usefully said 22 Russian combat assets, 6 Ukrainian combat assets. So that's moving towards a 4-to-1 ratio, which is exactly what the Ukrainians need. And of those 22, 13 of them are abandoned or destroyed. And of the 6, it doesn't say whether they are destroyed. In fact, it looks like most of them are damaged, looking down there. So that's good, but of course with only 6, you're going to skew with the damage to destroyed more easily, or destroyed to damage. So yeah, I think that is a really good day for the Ukrainians in terms of massive equipment. Of course, with the Ukrainians are having a bit of a problem with air bases getting hit, and that's happened for the 3rd day in a row, unfortunately. So possibly a damaged MiG-29, possibly destroyed. A bit of an unknown there with another Iskander strike. This is becoming a really grating issue, a massive concern for the Ukrainians. 2 air defense systems as well. A Tunguska, that's slightly older, and a Strela 10. That's your sort of, what would that be equivalent to? Kind of short range air defense, a bit like an Avenger, So this is bad for the Ukrainians, but they're not the highest value air defense systems, but still that's not cool. But number of surveillance and comms equipment, and then really one piece of artillery, one IFV and one APC. Howitzer, BMP, Humvee, so that's not too bad at all. A number of civilian vehicles. But essentially, those three items at the top of the list are a real concern for the Ukrainians. Now, the Russians have lost a Nebo radar, destroyed. That is hit with a tungsten. In fact, I've got a video of that's a high value bit of kit. In fact, I can't remember last time I checked the value of that. I don't know if the internet knew. Okay, here it is, and this is really significant. So, Copilot, which is the AI version of Microsoft, says recent incident: Ukrainian forces reportedly neutralized a Nebo U. I don't know which version of Nebo this is. Radar system in Russia, which had an estimated value of $100 million. They look a bit like, if we look at the images here, this is what the Nebo radar looks like. So possibly $100 million. And that then puts into context that loss in terms of, oh, that is huge. And that could overcome those losses for the Ukrainians there. So that's a significant loss for the Russians. 3 D-30s, talking about D-30s earlier. Tanks lost, damaged or destroyed here include 3 track guard and sheds. So those tanks that have been adapted with all the corrugated iron over the top to be used as glorified APCs. Itself telling you that they have a suboptimal situation for getting troops from A to B, and they're having to use tanks and either not be able to repair the tanks, so they're using them for this option, or they can repair them but using them for that option anyway because they don't have enough APCs or infantry fighting vehicles. Often means that the turret can't move. Sometimes it's on a tank whose turret can't move, and that's why they've turned it into these track guard and sheds. But then, why not fix it? So maybe not having the ability to fix up their tanks, maybe not having the need, because actually they're using such infantry-led attacks that tanks are becoming, I wouldn't say obsolete, but less useful than an APC. So on and so forth. You see more of these on your list. You start wondering, whether this is telling a story of woe for the Russians and their equipment, and a number of other tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, usual kind of BMP2s, BTR, BMD, armor personnel carriers, a couple of different ones there, BTR, MTLB, BTR again. It depends what sort of variant as to whether they are an infantry fighting vehicle or an APC, what armament they have or don't have on top. A number of trucks there, and your usual Desert Cross 1000-3. So these are the Chinese-provided Golf buggies. And then we have civilian vehicles as well, quite a large number of those. So, really heavy number of losses for the Russians. But the headline there is that Nebo radar, and for the Ukrainians it's that MiG-29 and a couple of air defense systems. So here we have, just to give you some more context of personnel losses, situation at one of the hospitals in Rostov. So you think it's Sea of Azov, you've got Crimea, just to the top right of Crimea, you've got a little part of the Black Sea called the Sea of Azov, where you've got Berdyansk and Mariupol, then you've got Taganrog, and then you've got Rostov-on-Don. So this is going to be close to Donetsk, close to the front lines, but inside Russia. And one of the hospitals here has wounded Russians just lying on the streets. Now, what's the context here? Is this fair to draw conclusions from, to say that things are going bad, or the hospitals are crowded, or whatever? I don't know, but it certainly doesn't look good from that. It is just anecdotal, of course. But then you add something like this. So this is a Russian at a cemetery in Saratov. So Saratov is sort of northeast of Ukraine. Go up a little bit, you get Engels 2 Air Base. Saratov sits on a river. It is a good few hundred kilometers from Ukraine, but it has been targeted, actually, Engels 2 Air Base there a number of times. Anyway, the cemetery here, this is what the result, quote from the guy on the camera, this is what the result of a special military operation looks like. There is no end to the cemetery. Our guys, and this is only Saratov, he is whining. Cemetery in the city of Saratov, Russia. Hundreds of Russians are buried in the new graveyard. The place was prudently chosen with a large margin because the war goes on until the last Russian. In other words, there's really big area for this this cemetery to like move into, if you like. And my goodness, there are a lot of dead bodies buried there. So yeah, it gives you another indication of the scale of the losses for the Russians. There, right, this one. Now this, hopefully I won't get in trouble for this one. Nothing happens. What's interesting about this, you have 5 Russians here, but 4 of these guys are carrying an injured Russian on a stretcher. And the 2 IEDs actually drop off to the side, so miss everyone, but they all get freaked out and run off. But what you want to check out is the guy on the stretcher here. And this is absolutely brilliant. So so they dump the stretcher. The guy falls off the stretcher here, but he's the guy that gets up and does a runner. And you're like, he's much faster than all the guys that were carrying him on the stretcher. And so the caption alongside this is that the Ukrainian drone has healed that guy as he just rolls off the stretcher and runs off. Yeah, nice one. Okay, so here we have a comment from Icaron, or Icurrent, saying, "Hi John, I've been following your recent discussions about the erratic nature of Russian tank losses. So I was talking about how there's some days 0, some days 3, then it goes up to 8, then you get a 20, then down to 4, then 8, then 9, then 20, and it's not as consistent as some of these other categories, and you know what's going on there." So he just throws out his explanation, take it with a pinch of salt and whatnot, but interesting stuff. Thank you for this. The erratic nature of Russian tank losses, and I wanted to share a plausible explanation that might shed some light on the situation. Explanation for fluctuating tank losses, erratic tank arrivals due to shortages. Logistical constraints. While transport logistics to the front lines remain operational, the primary issue is a shortage of tanks. As Russia depletes its inventory, the intervals between shipments grow longer because less and less material is available. Grouped shipments. Due to the high risk of targeting, Russia likely waits until they can send a full train load. That includes not only tanks but also ammunition and other vehicles to the front rather than dispatching multiple smaller, vulnerable trains. The results in tanks arriving in larger groups at less frequent intervals. This results in that. Drone density and deep penetration. High drone activity. Ukrainian forces have effectively used drones to target Russian tanks. The density of drones and their ability to penetrate deep into the enemy territory makes stationary vehicles highly vulnerable. Immediate deployment to mitigate the risk of tanks being targeted while stationary. Russian forces might deploy them immediately upon arrival. This tactic ensures that tanks are used in common operations rather than becoming sitting targets. Immediate use and high losses. Operational imperative. Given the high risk of drone strikes, newly arrived tanks are likely put to use immediately. This results in intense periods of tank engagement and subsequent high loss rates. Combat role shifts. Tanks are also being modified and used in unconventional roles, which you just talked about, such as heavily armoured troop carriers to enhance their survivability. However, this adaptation doesn't fully mitigate the threat, leading to fluctuating loss rates as these modifications are tested. Additional observations and use of all available resources. There have been reports of wounded soldiers being sent directly back to the front lines, even with severe injuries like broken legs and arms. This shows that all available resources, whether personnel or material, are being used immediately. The same urgency applies to deploying newly arrived tanks and other equipment. All really good points here. Supporting observations, satellite imagery and intelligence reports. Satellite imagery showing the movement of tanks by rail to the front lines can provide direct evidence of erratic arrival patterns. These movements often correspond with spikes in tank losses as reported by sources like the Oryx blog. Field reports and analyst assessments. Reports from military analysts and think tanks such as Institute for the Study of War often provide insights into the broader logistical and strategic challenges faced by Russian forces. These reports can contextualize the erratic tank losses. Conclusion. The combination of erratic tank arrivals due to shortages, a strategy of grouping shipments to include tanks, ammunition and other vehicles to mitigate risk, and high density of Ukrainian drones leading to immediate deployment of tanks is a plausible explanation for the observed fluctuation in Russian tank losses. This pattern highlights the ongoing logistical challenges and tactical adaptations in response to the evolving dynamics of the conflict. Additionally, the immediate use of all available resources, including injured soldiers, underscores the urgency driving these decisions. I like that point to do with the fact that we can possibly draw a parallel to how they're using personnel, to how they are using military equipment. Everything's in short supply, right? This has been a really highly attritional war for the Russians. Second greatest army in the world has been reduced to a shadow of its former self. There's been constant either full-on mobilization or conscription turning into contracted soldiers, or crypto mobilization or klepto mobilization. All these different types of, like, we are desperate for troops, let's get them in and get them used, right? We need more, get them in, get them used, right? We need more, get them in, get them used. And it's the same for tanks, and it's the same for IFVs. It's like, right, fix them up, repair them, get them in, fix them up, repair them, get them in, get them from storage, you know, produce what we can, but we are sanctioned. It's all fairly desperate, and that will produce kind of bottlenecks in terms of logistics as they get equipment to the front lines. So the erratic loss of tanks could be as a result of the erratic procurement and arrival of tanks and so on and so forth. Anyway, really appreciate this. So thanks for this, matey. It's on the video right now, live or something. There you go. Happy days. Right, now moving on. Detonation of ammunition on a Russian MTLB installed with an S-60 anti-aircraft gun. Right, the S-60 is... I can't show you this because I hope that it doesn't play automatically here. Yeah, so good. Right, so this is a pretty horrific indication of what happens when you either have poorly maintained barrels. So this is on top of a tracked vehicle, is it, MTLB? And or if not poor barrels, then poor ammunition. So some claiming that this might be North Korean ammunition, but basically this guy in the middle has just stepped up. At the beginning, he gets up, sits down, and then fires it, and this whole thing blows up. Like that's 3 people lost to the war, almost certainly. There's a catastrophic explosion there that results in the loss of 3 trained crew members, the loss of that piece of equipment, and this is the absolute necessity in keeping your equipment well maintained and using decent ordnance, because you end up losing out. So when we look at lists like this, you think, okay, so say this is true, right? And 65 Ukrainians have targeted and damaged or destroyed 65 pieces of artillery. And you think, well, how many are they losing on a daily basis in the way that we've just not quite seen, but the way that I've referenced? You can check out the video. It's linked in the description below. Now, here we have that Nebo SVU, possibly $100 million worth of radar equipment here, getting hit with a Gimler's HIMARS rocket with the tungsten shrapnel. And although the round lands not on the Nebo, you can see that, you can see the array there. Although it lands over here, you know, with these tungsten fragments, that has been absolutely shredded. And I presume, you know, it's not on top of it, but I presume that radar is really suffering as a result. And that has been listed as destroyed by Andrew. Interesting. I mean, unless there's other footage for it. It's interesting that he's got that as destroyed by Gimler's. And not damaged, but he's better judged than I am of these things. It would be highly unlikely it is operational at the moment. Whether you can fix it, I don't know. You know, it's not like something falls off it. You just need to replace that part. This has been shredded by tungsten, you know, going through it. And something like radar, the sensitive radar equipment there's every chance that is effectively destroyed. Special Operation Fisher, a Russian sailor disabled the Serpukov Project 21631 billion M missile ship in the Russian Baltic Fleet and crossed over to the side of Ukraine. So I don't even remember this, but about what? In fact, I'll tell you when. July? No, that's a press conference. When was it? I can't remember when it was, but sometime back there was the Serpukov that was set on fire in Kaliningrad. And inside it, and some people are saying, oh, that's a mobile phone that's exploded or something like that. But actually, it appears that it was a sabotage by a Russian who who's gone over to the pro-Ukrainian Russian fighters. So on July the 3rd, 2024, during a press conference in Ukraine form, the details of a long-term special operation Rybelka of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, carried out in cooperation with the Freedom of Russia Legion, that's the guys, and the I Want to Live project were revealed for the first time. It's about the damage to the missile ship of the aggressor state of Russia, the Serpukhov, and the transfer to Ukraine of an active serviceman of the Baltic Fleet of the Russian Federation. Quote, at the beginning of April this year, that's when it was, there was information about an incident of smoke with a small missile ship, Serpukhov, which is part of the Baltic Fleet of the Russian Federation at the base of the city of Baltijsk. Now we can say it was part of the Operation Rybelka, which lasted from 2023, said Andrei Yusov, a representative of the Ministry of Ukraine. Since 2023, a Russian sailor with the call sign Goga secretly joined the Freedom of Russia Legion to oppose the criminal Putin regime. For a long time, at the risk of his own life, this Russian, who served in the Navy for 11 years and had access to state secrets of the Russian Federation, transferred important data to the security and defense forces of Ukraine. When staying on the ship and further work in the interests of resistance to the Kremlin became threatening, active actions inside the Serpukhov were planned and implemented. As a result of the sabotage, it was possible to significantly destroy the aggressor's missile ship from the inside and completely destroy its means of communication and automation. The ship Serpukhov was launched in 2015, one of the most modern missile ships in the fleet of the aggressor, capable of using Caliber and Oryx missiles. As a result, the damaged Russian ship needs long and expensive repairs. His withdrawal from combat duty, where were we? Sorry about that, is an extremely important factor in the security and defense forces of Ukraine. After the active phase of fishing special operation, the sailor was taken out of the Russian territory by specialists of the I Want to Live project. He had secret materials with him, in particular about the state of the military-industrial complex of the Russian Federation. So that's going to be quite a haul for the Ukrainians there, and that was the ship that was damaged, particularly on the inside there. Now, Russian media, this is a kind of case of Russian fire, report that a warehouse with chemicals is on fire in Sverdlovsk region. I think Yekaterinburg has been mentioned. Locals reported hearing explosions. I don't know whether that was to do with the strike or whether it's kind of Russia on fire. Anton Gerashchenko talks about that as well. Oh, no, that was him. Oh, I had two videos of this and I've copied the same one twice. Oh, well. Anyway. That was happening yesterday. So now moving on to distant strikes, we have 22 drones were flown into Ukraine last night. 21 of the 22 were shot down. Some really good interception rates. However, the one that did get through hit a energy infrastructure in Chernihiv, so that is a bit of a shame. Targets were shot down in Kiev, Chernihiv, Zhytomyr, Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk, and Poltava regions. In the Chernihiv region, a Shahed hit an energy facility, and that was announced by the regional military head. So I don't know what the issue is there and whether that has caused long-term energy issues. Right, here we have Shahed tracker. New numbers are out, says Exit, for June Shahed attacks. When comparing them to the May chart below, we can see that there were 2 fewer days of attacks, and the interception rate fell slightly. So not quite as good interception rate as the month before, but actually it seems that fewer Shaheds are being used, at least comparing June to May. And I showed you yesterday that the missile use is it has also dropped as well, as far as I can work out. So I think with here we've had 2 or 3 incidents of warehouses with Shaheds in them be hit near the front lines where they've been storing the Shaheds to use at these release sites, and you know, those sites have been targeted as well. So that could have had an effect on the usage of drones, Shahed drones, recently. Now, Russian naval blogger talks about the 2nd of July surface attack drones on Novorossiysk, so not last night but the night before, and we saw, well, there were claims that I think 2 drones, Sea Baby drones, were blown up by the Russians. Well, a certain Russian officer, so the naval blogger says a certain Russian officer is guilty of binge drinking, which leads to such results. Essentially, they've let the drones through. It was a mistake, and more attacks are now expected. So, and those whose responsibilities include organising the early detection of naval drones and their destruction, at least on the border of the territorial waters, you've been peed on. Once again, you let the enemy kamikaze into the bay, forcing the entire hero city to jump up half the night and hide children away from the windows. And yes, somewhere there is one high official who periodically goes on a drinking binge throughout the war and then lays under IVs. Almost everyone knows about him. If you get drunk again, your own officers will disgrace you right in your office, and I will help them spread it. I really hope you read it and draw conclusions. You can consider this a black mark. I can no longer tolerate the obscene attitude towards naval service. Tovarish Major and everyone who guessed who I'm talking about, you can contact me in the bot and we'll talk. So on and so forth. But yeah, interesting. So not happy with the situation there. I guess it was the fact that those drones got so far as to approach the ships, to get that close before they were detected and treated. Now, I think the idea is that they didn't get through, they didn't destroy any ships, but, you know, the Ukrainians are shown with just a couple of drones that they can get that far. Well, what could they do with another 20 drones on the same target? So yeah. And then yesterday I talked to you about how Dnipro was hit, and there was a shopping centre was hit, but also a machine building plant. I said there was a fire somewhere else, but didn't really hear much. Anyway, the latest was that 40 people were injured, 5 were killed in the strikes on Dnipropetrovsk, and that machine building plant was hit, and that could be significant. A few sources, like if you look at that, that's probably gives you a good sense. You've got 3 smoking areas in Dnipro. Russia attacked residential areas in Dnipro city with missiles. They did it in the morning where there are a lot of people in the streets. Shopping mall was damaged, at least 5 civilians killed. It's hard to believe that there are people in Europe and USA who justify this. It's that last point that I just wanted to share with you, because it still annoys me. You get people like Jackson Hinkle or whoever just justifying this continued behaviour from the Russians on the Ukrainians. It's like, seriously, come on. Like, how can you sit there and do that? People like Colonel McGregor. Now, I know there's probably a lot of money changing hands with those people, but others who then spread those seeded pieces of disinformation and justification of the Russian war machine, they need to take a long, hard look at themselves and see if their moral calculations are where they should be. Right, explosions in Kursk last night. Don't know what was hit, but one would assume a military target, as is I mean, that's the difference between the Ukrainians and the Russians, is generally you see Ukrainians target military or explicitly energy or refineries that help to either fund the war for the Russians, or allow certain areas to have power to help with the prosecution of the war effort. Due to a drone attack, a unique electrometallurgical plant of the Russian military-industrial complex was stopped, and this is kind of what I'm talking about. This is the kind of target that Ukraine are consistently going for. And this was on the night of July the 1st, so it became known that the result of the drone attack, so 3 nights ago now, on the Oskil electrometallurgical plant, named after Ugorov, was seriously damaged. According to information on its website, the plant is the only full-cycle metallurgical enterprise in Russia that uses technologies that make it possible to obtain metal that is practically free of harmful impurities and residual elements. They tried to shoot down the drones with small arms to no avail. The sounds of shooting can be heard in the video. It was recorded that OEMK stopped working due to the destruction of drones of 2 main electrical substations in the Belgorod region. So again, hitting those substations is not just about, giving making life harder for civilians there. There are direct consequences. So this is I'm not trying to be like pro-Ukrainian here, but it just seems to me from all the evidence available that Ukrainians and it makes sense anyway, because they have fewer missiles and drones and have had over the course of the war fewer missiles and drones. So they absolutely have to use them as sensibly as possible. It's not just a moral dimension. It's also the world is looking, and if Ukraine do anything horrific with their missiles, like slamming them into Russian residential areas, then they're going to be held much more accountable than Russia, that seems to be able to get away with anything like this and then sit on the bloody United Nations Security Council. Nonetheless, so here we have 2 electrical substations in the Belgorod region getting hit that affects stop the working of the electrometallurgical plant. The Starioskol substation near the village of Neznamovo and the Metallurgiskaya substation near the village of Volokonovskoye. Not bad. The largest in Europe. A power outage at the Oskol electrometallurgical plant caused all electric arc furnaces to stop and the metal in them to solidify. To understand the seriousness of the situation, to restart the furnaces, it is necessary to completely clean them and replace the arc elements, which will take months. Several sources working at the plant claim that only new furnaces need to be installed. In view of the fact that OEMK was built using German technologies by German specialists, it's therefore quite problematic to restore the work of the plant without their participation. A team of 11,000 employees was under the threat of a drone attack. Oskol electrometallurgical plant produces high-quality steel for the Russian automotive and mechanical engineering industries and is therefore an exceptional importance to the country's military-industrial complex. Hugely important. I mean, this is just as a sidebar. In the UK, there's been this talk about moving our furnaces to electrometallurgical electric furnaces. Not only, well, for a number of reasons, partly environmental, partly technology and future-proofing, blah blah blah. But interesting that if you blow up substations near those, then that can cause some serious knock-on effects to these kinds of furnaces. Really good stuff from Ukraine. That's exactly the sort of strategic approach that Ukraine is employing and benefiting from. Russia's so we have another airbase targeted, 3rd in 3 days. Russia's missile strikes on Kryvyi Rih were indeed aimed at the airfield. Now, Russia shows a drone video of Dolgintsevo being hit, but it looks to me, says Tim White, like the aircraft have been scrambled by the time the strike arrived. Russia claims it hit MiG-29 and 2 Su-25 jets and killed 15 servicemen. I don't know that you can get that from there, but certainly some really sizable explosions. There was supposedly something under protection. So the first thing to note is that there is at least limited protection there. You've got drone cages or sort of cope cages and some kind of shelters against drones, but something like that will not protect against an Iskander missile, right? And yeah, that's the nature of the beast. You need much more fundamental protection from that. Another day, another airbase attack, says War Vehicle Tracker. Russian forces utilizing this kind of M ballistic missile managed to destroy a Ukrainian Su-25 supposedly at Dolgintsevo airfield. At least it had some kind of shelter, so it would have been safe from Lancets. Unknown whether it's real or a decoy. There's a possibly another plane there. Now, earlier on we saw that's a MiG that was talked about there. So I don't know exactly. A little larger analysis here from Status 6. So for the 3rd day in a row, Russia has conducted missile strikes on Ukrainian air bases. Today the target was Dolgintsevo near Kryvyi Rih, where MiG-29 fighter jets and Su-25 attack planes are stationed. A single Iskander M struck the apron where the MiG-29 fighter jet, I believe. So you have one person saying it's a Sukhoi, another person saying it's a MiG, and Andrew Popetcha's listed it as a MiG. Was parked under a camo net, though the vehicle cut before any damage assessment could have been available. You've always got to wonder why you would cut it at the exact time you would be best able to decipher whether there is indeed serious damage. Whenever that happens, it just makes me think that you're hiding something, and you're hiding the fact that you haven't done as much damage as you would have people believe. Otherwise, you just show it. I don't understand these cuts. To note, this is the first time I see the deployment of camo nets at the Dolgintsevo airbase. Earlier, the warplanes based there were usually parked under the open sky. On Monday, Russian missile strikes targeted the Mirorod airbase, which resulted in the destruction of at least one Su-27. On Tuesday, Poltava airbase was hit. The Russians claimed damaging at least one Mi-24 military attack helicopter. So this is continuing, and it's all about, you don't get to fire those missiles. Well, you can do, but you don't know whether there'll be anything on those aprons unless you've got unless you've got reconnaissance drones, and those drones are becoming the bane of the Ukrainians at the moment. Interesting, this Hawk air defense system, which is an old school system, Ukrainians are still receiving Hawk missiles from the US in their military aid package. There's another aid package that's just been announced yesterday, 2.3 billion is it, of which 150 million is lots of kind of usual stuff, and then the rest of it is interceptors being ordered, I believe, for Patriots. So I'm guessing Ukraine are just going through Patriot missiles, are using them, but also they're probably about to get quite a few Patriot air defense systems, and so the US has put in a massive order for interceptors so that they have enough interceptors for the systems they're getting. But anyway, here's a Hawk system which is pretty old school, pretty much obsolete around the world. You know, they are old. These have been around since Vietnam times and before. Obviously upgraded and whatnot. Spain has provided some of these. Other nations have. Taiwan had a shed load of these, but I don't think they ended up going to Ukraine. They had something like 50, I think, that they were talking about giving to Ukraine, but I think they kept hold of them or something. Obviously, things in Taiwan are pretty hairy at the moment. But it's good to see that these are being used. I've seen a few of these fire missiles, videos of that, and we've got a number of missiles getting taken out as well as drones. So great stuff that the Hawk is having a bit of a second wind there. You could call it Hawk wind, although I don't think that is indeed a silver machine. It's more, yeah, that's definitely green. Music reference 101. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces here. There have been these grinding increases in territorial control for the Russians, particularly in Chasiv Yar, so that it appears that they've taken the Canal micro-district, the other side of the canal now. Ukrainian troops retreated from Canal micro-district of Chasiv Yar. It was not expedient to hold it, and the positions of the Ukrainian defenders were destroyed there, according to spokesman of the Kortitsia, Nazar Voloshin. Something we were expecting. We were expecting the whole of Chasiv Yar to have been taken by the end of summer, and probably before then. Like the kind of worst case scenario, the best case scenario was it would hold out until the end of the summer. But actually, although they've taken, you know, Canal micro district and they're looking much better to the east of the canal there, the Russians, it is still a lot slower than everyone was expecting, including the battalion commanders in Chasiv Yar. So we'll come to that in a second, come back to that, but it just gives you an idea there. Now, BBC News has had an interesting article. Ukraine calls them meat assaults, Russia's brutal plan to take ground. Lieutenant Colonel Anton Bayev of the Katia Brigade of Ukraine's National Guard says wave after wave can arrive in just a few hours at frontline positions north of Kharkiv. Quote, the Russians can use these in most cases purely to see where our firing equipment is located and to constantly exhaust our units. The idea is that they are sending these waves of humans just to see, like, sacrificially to see where the firing positions are, so that maybe they can hit them with aviation, or send more units at those specific points. Nice. And then it exhausts the units as well. Quote, our guys stand in positions and fight, and when out 4 or 5 waves of the enemy come at you in a day, which you have to destroy without end, it's very difficult, not only physically, but also psychologically. This is really reminiscent of the Bakhmut waves from Wagner. It seems they are employing the same tactics here to overwhelm the Ukrainians in the Kharkiv, Vovchansk region, which is partly why. So the other day, I told you that Zelensky said that the ratio of Russian to Ukrainian losses in personnel are 6-1. But actually, I didn't tell you all of what he said there, which is apparently it's moved from 4-1 to 6-1 because of the attacks in Kharkiv region, which fits in with this, which is they're heavily using infantry-led assaults, meat waves, and they are losing a lot of troops as well. So that increase in troop losses has changed the ratio figure from 4-1 to 6-1. Both of those figures are interesting because A, it shows the Ukrainians are doing a pretty good job of attriting the Russian forces, if you can believe Zelensky's figures, right? There's a big if there. But if Zelensky is correct, then A, it shows that Ukrainians are doing a good job, attritionally speaking. But B, you can actually work out their loss figures because they produce the general staff figures and say, well, 1,200 troops have been lost, Russian troops have been lost today. And if Zelensky says, well, we're destroying them at 6-1 ratio, then that tells you that 200 troops have been lost today. So if Zelensky is to be believed, we can calculate Ukrainian losses. They were 4-1, so they were losing when it was sort of 800 a day, maybe 900 a day. They were losing 200 there then. So now it's gone up to 1,200 a day. Actually, they're still losing 200. So it's just, again, if it's true. The tactic has led to staggering Russian casualties since Moscow launched its latest offensive 2 months ago. Around 1,200 soldiers were being killed or wounded every day in May and June, the highest rate since the beginning of the war, according to Western officials. Those attacking are normally quickly spotted by drones above, and the Russians leave their dead and wounded in the battlefield. Lieutenant Colonel Bayev says, quote, their main task is simply meat assaults and our total exhaustion. The tactic is a sign that Russia is seeking to make most of its key advantage, which is numbers. Okay, yes, that's true, but they don't have an inexhaustible number of these troops. There will surely be a breaking point at some point. Now, I saw an attack on video last night, which was just a whole squad of guys running into a tree line, and then basically I couldn't work out whether it was an artillery shell or a massive drone, because I'm sure I saw a drone flying around, but it was a bit small. It was on my phone. And then it just blew up in the middle of all those people. So you had about 10 people running, and then they all just flattened, just like that. Okay, some of them may have got up afterwards and survived, but, you know, wow. That's the one squad taken out like that. And that's a meat assault. They weren't attacking in an APC, which would have given them some kind of survivability. Instead, that ordnance landed directly in the middle, right in the middle of that group of people running. The article continues, and there have been complaints. Of course, you know, always remember these are human beings, and this war needs to stop. Like, you know, but as much as these guys are human beings, they're also human beings being ordered to do something that's morally repugnant, right? And you don't do anything about them because they're human beings. You stop them because you've got a country full of human beings. You don't want these human beings overtaking and treating like dirt and torturing and raping, etc., etc. So, okay. Yeah, it's horrible. War is horrible. Don't invade our country. If you do, a group of 10 of you running at us will get a piece of ordnance landing in the middle of them. There have been complaints from the Russian side about, quote, crippled regiments in which wounded soldiers are forced back into fighting. One video shows dozens of men, some on crutches, appealing to their commanders because they say they are wounded and require hospital treatment, but instead are being sent back into combat. All of this, Western officials say, means Moscow can keep throwing soldiers, even if poorly trained, straight into the front line at the same rate they are being killed or wounded. Yes, it does, but it also shows that they weren't doing that a year ago. Right, so when we talk about Russia is running out, or you keep saying this is unsustainable, but they keep taking these losses. This is proof that it is unsustainable, because they're having to throw in crippled soldiers back to the front line. That is the prima facie evidence that this is unsustainable. Like the losses of SPGs and more modern guns that the Russians did have were unsustainable, because they're now using D20s and D30s, D10s, 20s and 30s, and losing them at large rates on the front line. Those losses of IFVs and tanks were unsustainable because now they're using tracked guard and sheds and Desert Cross 1003 golf buggies, quads and motorbikes. There was one video the other day where 28 motorbikes were destroyed. That is an example of unsustainable losses. Ukraine, I don't know why I'm ranting. Anyway, yes, Ukraine could not match the Russian tactics, even if it had the numbers, partly due to a different attitude towards casualties, as they value life. A senior general was removed in recent weeks after complaints he was using what are often called Soviet tactics, throwing people at the front lines. Quote, there are a lot of criticisms because we have lost a lot of our guys because of Soviet-type mindset and strategy, says Ivan Stupak, a former security service officer. We are limited with manpower. We have no other options than thinking of our people. In the area around Kharkiv, Russian advances have been stopped, but in the east, Russia's attritional approach is making slow but steady advances. Quote, unfortunately, there are a lot of Russians. They are trying to conduct this rolling operation centimetre by centimetre, inch by inch, 100 metres per day, 200 metres per day, and unfortunately, it's successful for them. Successful in terms of taking land, but not in terms of conserving personnel and materiel. That's my interjection. There is frustration in Kyiv about the pace of Western support. One senior official complains that they are receiving enough help to ensure they do not lose, but not enough to make sure that they win. Western officials acknowledge 2024 has been a tough year for Ukraine, with delays in the arrival of US military aid creating a major strain on defences, which has cost military territory and lives. Quote, it seems like a so-called incremental approach, Alexander Merezko, chair of Ukraine's Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Committee, told the BBC, quote, we receive little by little, and I get the impression our Western allies give a little bit of weaponry, and they see what happens next as if they're afraid of what they refer to as escalation. The lifting of restrictions of using US weapons over the border into Russia has made a difference and helped stall Moscow's assault on Kharkiv. Quote, if we have to fight with our hands tied behind our back, we'll be only bleeding to death, says Merezko. That's why it's crucially important to be allowed to use long-range missiles in the territory of Russia, and we already have results. But a Ukrainian official said that the use of longer-range strikes into Russia had only a palliative and not fundamentally altering, and was not fundamentally altering the dynamic of the war. Quote, we are driving towards stalemate, former Security Service Officer Ivan Stupak says, acknowledging that this may lead eventually to the bitter pill of some form of negotiation. And it says at the end, for Lieutenant Colonel Anton Bayev on the front line near Kharkiv, the ability to strike into Russia may have been vital, but he now sees the enemy adapting its tactics and not just with meat assaults. His losses now can now come from mortars and glide bombs, while his Ukrainian forces remain short of ammunition. Quote, we need everything, and there's always a lack, he says. The boys are holding on. We're all hanging on. It's hard, but everyone knows the price and why it's all being done. Then we have, so that's the context I wanted to lead you towards what Andrew Perpetuous says here, which is interesting because Andrew is often accused of being like a doom poster. He was earlier on, particularly 7 months ago, I guess, the counteroffensive didn't go very well. Andrew was always very critical about where Ukraine decided to attack down at Robotyne, saying, as I said at the time, it's the most heavily defended area. I don't know why you would attack there. And he was really critical of that. And then, of course, the lack of ammunition and everything and so on and so forth. But actually, more recently, he's been much more upbeat about Ukraine's prognosis and where this war looks like it's going, in terms of Russia is throwing everything at the problem and not having very good results and attriting themselves at tremendous rates. And he's looking at the footage of that every single day. Anyway, he says, I'm frankly 0% concerned with, so going back to the whole Chasiv Yar thing here, I'm 0% concerned with any Russian advance going on currently. They are using all of their resources to push these attacks, burning through supplies, and it will permanently weaken Russia as a result. All of the advances they're making are ultimately minor. And if you zoom out that map from Chasiv Yar, Chasiv Yar's a little bit important because of the Kramatorsk-Slovyansk ring behind it, but that's really well defended. If you're talking about like small advances in Avdiivka, yeah, there's a road they could interdict. But if you like zoom out and look at the whole of Ukraine, it gives you the proper context of this. Russia is being permanently weakened as a result. All of the advances they are making are ultimately minor and were predicted to happen. Nothing going on is outside of what was expected. So we expected Chasiv Yar to fall by really by now, and it hasn't. In fact, if anything, he says, the Russian timeline is dramatically behind what even my most pessimistic view of what Russia was capable of. And it makes me wonder if I've been overestimating them. I thought they would have captured Canal by the beginning of June and would be assaulting Chasiv Yar proper for a month by now. But they've only recently been able to capture Canal. I thought they would have pushed to the highway north of Ocheritina. So that's that T0504 highway that comes down from Chasiv Yar through Konstantinivka and then goes to Pokrovsk. And you've got that Avdiivka salient. And in a very northwestern part of that, they're moving towards this highway. And he says, I thought they would have pushed to that highway north of there by now, but their advance north has been slowed to a crawl, and instead they've started moving west, more directly west than northwest. I thought they would have advanced parallel to New York on the west and be attacking Toretsk from the south, but instead they're moving through Pavichne and are only now entering New York. And most of all, I never in a million years would have believed Ukraine would stop Russia in Pobjeda. So there's this little village of Pobjeda south of, is that the one south of Novomykhailivka, that south of Marinka, sorry, that that the Russians have been stopped at is just this agricultural community, a bit like Novelska, south of Avdiivka. Both of these tiny little agricultural places that have actually been really well fortified and have stopped traditionally the Russians being able to flank both Marinka and Pervomaisky up further north. These little places have held out. The Ukrainians done an insanely good job, and it's like, I never in a million years would have thought Ukraine could stop Russia at this freaking small village of Pobieda with a couple of piggery agricultural warehouses. So we need to understand the context of, yeah, it is really tough for the Ukrainians, but they have managed to stop the second greatest army in the world. And the Russians are only able to grind through some 100 meters here and 100 meters there by taking phenomenal losses. And those losses are being tracked every single day. And I'm giving you those losses. And we get the trolls on here every day saying, oh, Andrew's too petty or whatever. Like, I get the same comments from Russian trolls saying, you can't trust his figures, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, where's your visually confirmed verification list? Where's your database? Where are you poring over satellite imagery and video imagery on a daily basis? Ain't nowhere. So troll, sod off, right? And let the adults talk. So Russia are failing. Russia are failing big time. That's not to say Ukraine aren't without massive concerns in terms of mobilization, in terms of energy infrastructure. I think is the biggest weakness. Medium range drones that are allowing Russia to hit these air bases. These are big worries. But in terms of what's going on the front lines, as terrible as that is, Russia are weakening themselves on a week by week basis. As David D says here, and take his claims with a pinch of salt, 2 years of Russian gains in purple. At this rate, the breakouts will take 26 years to reach the Dnipro River. That is what they've gained over the time we've been speaking, pretty much. Just pretty nuts there. Okay, right. There's a rumor that General Teplinsky has been wounded again. On June the 30th, 2024, missile strike targeted the command post of the Dnipro a group of troops near Henichesk. That's north of Crimea, occupied Kherson region. The attack involved 2 HIMARS MLRS with cluster warheads hitting a 2-story administrative building used by as a command center. The strike resulted in 5 fatalities, 12 injuries. Colonel General Mikhail Teplinsky, the commander of the Dnipro group, so he's been famous guy, in charge of a large portion of the Russian army, was wounded. Special Commission is investigating the incident, suspecting a mole, as a strike occurred shortly after Teplinsky's arrival. We also are hearing that the 83rd Guard Assault Brigade, which is surrounding Vovchansk, has had its commander arrested. Russian Colonel Gorodilov has been arrested for fraud on a especially large scale. Accordingly, military impunity often tempts morally unstable commanders with the possibility of quick enrichment. In any case, if this is the case, then this is not the first time. So is this what you'd expect if things are going well for Russia? You've got one of their main commanders injured. You've got one of the guys in charge of one of the assaults up in Kharkiv being arrested for embezzlement, basically. And then you have supposedly one of the good guys for Russia, General Popov, who was arrested because he was critical of Shoigu and Gerasimov. Fraud, embezzlement, no. General Popov dared to speak about catastrophic Russian losses in Zaporizhia offensive and crossed paths with Putin and his gang. Hardly feel sorry for the guy, though, for he is a war criminal. But investigation into him has now been completed, and he was arrested, and he's back in Moscow or whatever. So instead of having one of the best, most competent commanders on the field doing what they might see as the right thing for the Russians, they've arrested him because there were internal arguments with the military command. And so is that what you expect if things are going well? Tucker Carlson's looking like he might have an interview lined up with Zelensky, which is causing a lot of people to actually say this is really good because you need that corrective against the Putin interview that Tucker Carlson did. I think this is a really good idea, and I hope it comes about. However, all the usual culprits, Jackson Hinkle, a Ukrainian agent tried to bomb your car while you were in Moscow. Please be careful and don't do this in Ukraine. Stage it on neutral ground, says Ian Mars Chong. Stage it on neutral grounds, or he might have you disappeared like Gonzalo Lira. And then another one. Please don't go to Ukraine to do it. Do it somewhere like Hungary, neutral territory. Yeah, sort of. Zelensky, though, is reportedly considering, these rumours are going around a lot at the moment, dismissing Prime Minister Shmyhal. Now, this could be, someone like Andrew Perpetua was talking about how Yermak's involved in this, and Yermak is the bad guy in the. Some people say he's the most important person in politics in Ukraine, right, for good or ill. So you've got in the presidential team Andrei Yermak as his main kind of advisor, and Zelensky here, and there seems to be these issues going on internally with the higher echelons of Ukrainian politics, and it's a shame. I mean, I think Shmyhal seems to have been doing his job, getting on with it and doing it pretty well as a prime minister, but anyway, he might be not long for that job. And the last thing I'm going to say is the weather. The weather is looking like it's going to be absolutely scorching, heating up to 41 degrees in Ukraine next week. And right across Europe. Last year, if you remember, we had fires all over Europe, Greek islands. Climate change is a thing. I know some of you go, oh, well, no, that's not what I've read on Fox News. Maybe don't watch Fox News. I don't have a go at me for saying that. It was a cheap pot, but, it's kind of true. Things are hot. And that might affect the battlefield in particular ways. It might affect decomposition of bodies. It might affect diseases. We've heard about issues in the Kherson region with cholera, etc., etc. Water, the Russian soldiers, the Ukrainian soldiers as well. But if you don't have good logistics, you're going to need more and more water. This might have an effect in the ways that, too much rain has an effect, or too much heat will have an effect maybe on the battlefield as well. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. It's been a really long one. Take care. Toodle pips.